The feeling doesn't arrive because something happened. It arrives because something didn't. No fight, no cold message, no moment you can actually point to. Just a shift in the air, a reply that was slightly shorter than usual, a day that went quieter than expected, a pause that lasted a few seconds too long, and suddenly your chest is tight, and your mind is already somewhere in the future, preparing for an ending that hasn't started. You have probably spent a lot of time trying to talk yourself out of this, reminding yourself that nothing actually happened, that you're reading into it, that this person has given you no real reason to feel what you're feeling, and none of that works because the part of your brain generating the feeling is not listening to logic. It is running a different process entirely, one that operates below language, below reasoning, below anything you can consciously override just by knowing better. What you are dealing with is not emotional immaturity. It is a prediction system that was built for a different environment running in this one. Modern neuroscience increasingly describes the brain not as a machine that reacts to what happens, but as a machine that predicts what is about to happen. This is the framework associated with Carl Friston at University College London, known as predictive processing. And its central claim is this: the brain is constantly generating forecasts. It builds a model of the world based on prior experience, uses that model to predict what comes next, and compares those predictions against incoming signals. When the prediction matches reality, the system registers calm. When there is a gap between what was predicted and what arrived, or what failed to arrive, the brain flags that gap as something that needs to be resolved. That gap has a name. Researchers call it prediction error. And it is not neutral. The brain treats unresolved prediction error as a potential threat signal, regardless of whether the situation is actually dangerous. This is the mechanism, not your attachment history, not your childhood, not the last person who hurt you. The process is more fundamental than any of that. Your brain predicted a signal, a reply, a tone, a rhythm of connection it had come to expect, and the signal did not arrive on schedule. The prediction failed. And the emotional system does not wait to find out why. What makes this more disorienting is that the brain does not generate a neutral alert when a prediction fails. It generates an explanation. And those explanations follow a specific bias that clinical psychology researchers have documented extensively. Michel Dugas and colleagues, whose work on generalized anxiety at the Université du Québec developed the concept of intolerance of uncertainty, found that certain nervous systems treat ambiguity itself as a threat. Not ambiguity plus bad outcome, but ambiguity alone. The unresolved state is the trigger. People with high intolerance of uncertainty show measurably stronger emotional reactions to unclear social situations than to situations where something negative is actually confirmed. A clear rejection produces less distress than a situation that could go either way. Sit with that for a moment. The silence is harder than the ending would be. Your brain does not go quiet while it waits for more information. It starts building a case. The shorter reply becomes evidence of distance. The missed call becomes evidence of avoidance. The quieter day becomes evidence of something cooling. Each piece of missing data is loaded into a framework that was already primed to interpret absence as loss. The case builds itself, automatically, before you have made a single conscious decision about what to believe. This is where memory enters. And this is the part most conversations about abandonment sensitivity never reach. Elizabeth Loftus, whose research across decades established memory reconstruction as one of the most replicated findings in cognitive psychology, demonstrated that memory is not a fixed record. Every time you recall a past experience, you are not replaying it, you are rebuilding it, and the emotional state you are in at the moment of recall shapes the version that gets stored back. This means the quiet afternoon you are sitting in right now is doing something to your past. The anxiety activating in your body is reaching backward through memory, slightly recoloring every previous time someone went quiet, every previous time a connection shifted without warning. The memories that surface when you are in this state are the ones that confirm the pattern. The times things were fine do not come up, the times things fell apart do, and with each retrieval through anxiety, those memories become slightly more charged. not because anything in them changed, but because they have been accessed through fear, enough times that fear has become part of what they contain. You are not paranoid. You are running a pattern that has been reinforcing itself every time you have been in this state, in every relationship where the signal ever went quiet. Neuroscientist Anil Seth, whose work on perception and the predictive brain sits at the intersection of neuroscience and philosophy of mind, describes perception itself as a controlled hallucination. The brain does not receive reality. It constructs a version of reality from incomplete input, weighted by prior experience, and presents that construction as what is happening. What you feel when someone goes quiet is not the silence. It is your brain's rendering of what the silence means. And that rendering is built from every time silence meant something before. Every anxiety-colored memory of a connection that changed without explanation. Every time the prediction failed and the outcome was bad. You are not reacting to this moment. You are reacting to the accumulated weight of every similar moment superimposed onto this one. And the body is fully involved. Research by Sarah Dickerson and Margaret Kemeny in a 2004 meta-analysis examining cortisol response across dozens of social stress studies found that social evaluative threat, specifically the perception that your belonging or social standing is at risk, activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis and produces measurable cortisol release. This is the same hormonal pathway that responds to physical danger. The body does not distinguish between a predator and a person who hasn't replied. It responds to the perceived threat of relational loss with the same chemistry it would use to prepare you to run. This is why it is exhausting in a way that does not make sense to people who haven't experienced it. You did not do anything. You are sitting still. But your body has been running a stress response for 3 hours because someone's communication pattern deviated slightly from what your nervous system expected. James Cone's social baseline theory at the University of Virginia adds the evolutionary dimension. His research argues that the human brain evolved under the default assumption of social proximity, that others are nearby, that belonging is stable, that connection is the baseline condition. The brain calculates everything from energy cost to perceived safety against that assumption. When social proximity feels uncertain, the brain does not simply register an emotion. It registers a resource problem. Vigilance increases, attention narrows. The system redirects processing power toward monitoring the relational environment, the same way it would redirect resources toward monitoring a physical threat. This is why your concentration disappears. Why you cannot read or work or hold a conversation normally while the feeling is running. Your brain has reallocated its resources. It has decided that tracking this perceived relational uncertainty is the priority. Now, layer on what Daniel Gilbert at Harvard has documented through decades of effective forecasting research, humans consistently and significantly overestimate both the intensity and the duration of future emotional states. When a difficult feeling arrives, the brain does not experience it as temporary. It experiences it as the new permanent condition. The silence does not feel like a pause. It feels like a conclusion. The distance does not feel like a mood. It feels like a direction. And from inside that state, it is almost impossible to access the part of your mind that knows situations change, that people have bad days, that quietness is rarely a verdict. The feeling arrives as fact. The brain presents its prediction as reality. And the harder you try to reason your way out, the more the threat system interprets that effort as confirmation that something genuinely needs to be resolved. This is not a loop that stays contained to one relationship. Every time the pattern completes, every time the anxiety activated, the story built itself, the signal eventually returned or didn't, and the prediction model updated. The threshold for triggering it the next time shifted slightly lower. What started as a reaction to real ambiguity becomes, over years, a reaction to almost any deviation from expected closeness. A slightly different tone. An hour of silence where there usually isn't one. A response that was fine by any reasonable measure, but landed differently than yesterday's. The nervous system has been trained, through repetition, to treat the rhythm of connection as data. And any break in that rhythm as a warning. The sensitivity is not growing because you are becoming more fragile. It is growing because the pattern is becoming more efficient. The brain has gotten very good at this particular prediction failure. It can generate the full cascade, the tightening, the case building, the cortisol, the forecasted ending, from smaller and smaller inputs. A raised threshold in the past would have required a real disruption. The current threshold requires almost nothing. And that is the part that does not resolve on its own. Not because change is impossible, but because the pattern does not need new experiences to keep running. It runs on what it already has. The memories it reconstructs, the predictions it generates, the threat responses it triggers, all of it is available without anything new happening. Which is why the feeling can arrive in the middle of a relationship that is going well, with a person who is doing nothing wrong, on a day when nothing happened. The prediction system does not require an event. It only requires the absence of certainty.